All right, guys. So I'm going to try something new today. I'm going to try a different format for a video. It's going to be a little bit longer, a little bit more long-winded. I'm not going to be able to do my special in 3 minutes title, but we're going to see if my face and my voice and sarcasm and full takes is valuable. So the topic of today is null pointer exceptions. I noticed that the videos on null pointer exceptions were pretty long-winded. I didn't think that they were exceptionally good, so I'm making one, and we're going to see how bad it is. Right. So I've got this blog post, geeksforgeeks.org/nullPointerException in Java, and I'm going to be drawing pretty much everything from this post. So you could read it. You could read the post. You get all the value from a video from this post. Or you could watch the video, and I'll read it for you, pretty much. I'm not going to read the whole thing for you, but I'm going to paraphrase it pretty much in my own words for you, right? So, yeah, we're going to talk about all the ways that you can throw a null pointer exception. I'm going to touch on what null means, and then we're going to get out of here. So, what is null? Null is a special value that's used in Java. You may notice that I'm reading this paragraph. It indicates that there is no value assigned to a reference variable. And in this situation, a reference variable means something like this, right? So you've got an object type and then a name. So this is going to be our reference variable. So null here, right? Null indicates that there's no value assigned here, right? So we've got this string object. Null means no value. All right, so every time you get a null pointer exception, it's because you are dealing with an object or something like an object or object adjacent, and you're trying to treat it as if it's not, as if it has a real value, but it doesn't because it's null. All right, so we're going to go through all the examples that are listed on the Geeks blog post, just one by one through the code, and then yeah, we're going to see a bunch of null pointer exceptions. So number one, null object method invocation. So on the string object, there's a method called length. This will return the length of the string. And it will throw a null pointer exception if the string is null. So let's just see that for our eyeballs. There you go, right? Why is this the case? It's because you're trying to call a method. You're trying to do this. You're trying to say null.length. That's pretty much what you're trying to do here because, well, the object is null, right? Move on. So null object field access. Let's comment this out because this will always throw an NPE. And let's do null object field access next. So for this example, I created my own object. I couldn't think of an in-house Java object that has public fields. They do a really good job at encapsulating those fields, making them private. So I've got this trash tier object. I've got an int object. It's not an object, an int primitive type. I called it field. It is a field, but I also called it field. So I'm going to try to access that field when I have a type, a referenced variable, right, of type my object, but it's set to null. So that means there's no value here. So I'm just trying to print out the field of this object, and I get, I get an NPE, right? It stems from here because you can't do this. This is basically what you're trying to do. And, well, you cannot do that. So you get a null pointer exception. Java's pretty smart sometimes. All right, so now we're going to talk about arrays. I'm going to assume that you know a thing or two about arrays. This is what they look like, right? You can have a primitive type or an object type, but what happens when you add the square braces is it becomes a Java array. Now, if that array is null, then you can't do anything with it. You can't do anything with it at all. Why would you expect this to work? But let's say you didn't know that it was null. You didn't know, and so you innocently wrote code to access something about this array, right? like the length, for example, which would give you the length of the number of ints in this int array. Excuse me. Well, if that were the case, and that's what you were doing, then you would get a null pointer exception. Yeah, there's going to be some null pointer exceptions in this video, so just so that you're prepared for that. Next, we're going to talk about updating the index of a null array. It's the same thing that you were just trying to do. You just tried to take the length of something that had no value. You pretty much did this. That, again, doesn't work. And now this time, you're trying to update something inside of the array, right? Update or access or anything like that. As soon as you do that, as soon as you do what's on line 39 here, the square brace, but A is actually null. This is what you're really doing. This is what you're trying to do. You're trying to take the 0th element of null. That is nothing. This means nothing. And so you get a null pointer exception. You could just try to access it here, or you could try to assign it, and it would still be hot garbage. You cannot do that. That's a null pointer exception. What's next? So in Java, we have these things called exceptions. You can throw them. Typically, they reveal some kind of error status, right? But what happens if you throw null? Well, something pretty cool happens. It actually gets converted into a null pointer exception. So this is actually kind of a shorthand for something like, I guess you can make a new null pointer exception. You're basically doing this when you say throw null. And I can't think of any time that I wrote that code, because I don't think I threw that many exceptions when I was going to school. Like, why would you ever throw null? That doesn't make any sense to me. But if you do it, then you're going to get a null pointer exception. It's true. We skipped over 10. Did I do 10? I talked about 10. So this one was 10, right? Updating the index of a null array. We didn't actually do that. So I'm just going to show you that it's going to throw a null pointer exception, because it will. Yeah, it does. See, line 10, line 38. It throws a null pointer exception. Spoilers. Now, lastly, we have synchronizing over a null object. I'm not going to talk about what synchronizing is. What you need to know is that it's kind of like a method, in that it takes in an object and it has these curly braces indicating that you can do some lines of code. But a method can actually take a null object, but synchronized cannot. So if you do, you get a null pointer exception. So let's just run that code. As you can see, we get a null pointer exception on line 12, stemming from this line right here, where you tried to synchronize over a null object. You know what? If you feel like you want to hear what I have to say about synchronized, then leave a comment and maybe I'll make that video. But probably not, because I'm just gonna experiment with stuff. Yeah, so that's all the examples. Forgot a couple suggestions on how to deal with null in your programs. So the first suggestion I have for you is to do a null check. This is what a null check looks like. Let me just type the wrong thing first. Right. So we're checking to see if the object is not null, and then we're going to run our code. Right. So this avoids null pointer exception, because we just don't run the dangerous code if the object required is null, right? If one of the objects or several of the other objects is null. Yeah, I mean, you can do this. Another approach that I have for you is something that I like to call early termination. So instead of checking for not null, you check for null, and then you can throw an exception, or you can return out of the method like this, right? So this is a void return value, so you just write return, and then that will terminate this method early, right? Pros and cons to each. Obviously, with early termination, you cannot run any of the code that comes afterwards, right? That's pretty much the difference, right? It's like, do you have this other code that you want to run? And these are 2 approaches on dealing with objects which can be null. There you go. Definitely give me hate mail. Dox me if you can figure out who I am. Do everything possible that's negative, and then I will thank you for it. Yeah. But I'm done stealing your time. Thanks, bye.